Okay, now we jump into our gospel passage, which comes from John chapter 11, verses 1 through 45. Now a man was ill, Lazarus from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Martha was the one who had anointed the Lord with perfumed oil and dried his feet with her hair. It was her brother Lazarus who was ill. So the sisters of Lazarus sent word to Jesus, saying, "Master, the one you love is ill." When Jesus heard this, he said, "This illness is not to end in death, but is for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that he was ill, he remained for 2 days in the place where he was. Then after this he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just trying to stone you, and you want to go back there?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in a day? If one walks during the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks at night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him." He said this, and then told them, "Our friend Lazarus is asleep, but I am going to awaken him." So the disciples said to him, "Master, if he is asleep, he will be saved." But Jesus was talking about his death, while they thought that he meant ordinary sleep. So then Jesus said to them clearly, "Lazarus has died, and I am glad for you that I was not there, that you may believe. Let us go to him." So Thomas, called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go to die with him." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, only about 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary sat at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise." Martha said to him, "I know he will rise in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus told her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I have come to believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world." When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary secretly, saying, "The teacher is here and is asking for you." As soon as she heard this, she rose quickly and went to him. For Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still where Martha had met him. So when the Jews who were with her in the house, comforting her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out, they followed her, presuming that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her weeping, he became perturbed and deeply troubled, and said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Sir, come and see." And Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not the one who opened the eyes of the blind man have done something so that this man would not have died?" So Jesus, perturbed again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay across it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the dead man's sister, said to him, "Lord, by now there will be a stench. He has been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus raised his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you for hearing me. I know that you always hear me, but because of the crowd here I have said this, that they may believe that you sent me." And when he had said this, he cried out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, tied hand and foot with burial bands, and his face was wrapped in a cloth. So Jesus said to them, "Untie him and let him go." Now many of the Jews who had come to Mary and seen what he had done began to believe in him. Whew, goodness, that's a great passage. It's also very long, as I mentioned the last couple weeks. We're in long gospel passage season. That wasn't even actually the full chapter. There's another few verses to go. Actually, it goes all the way through to verse 57. So there's even more passages or verses in chapter 11 of John's Gospel. Obviously, that's the bulk of it. And just as like the last couple of weeks, it's possible there's going to be a shorter version read at Mass if the priest wants to focus on something else, or even if he wants to focus on this, but if his homily is going to be a little bit longer, or if he, like we just kind of all experience the constraints of our modern age, and Mass has to be under an hour, and whatever, all those things, he may choose to read a shorter version. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that if a priest chooses to do that. I prefer the longer version, but the church provides an option for us. So anyways, okay, so let's talk about this. So the raising of Lazarus is the 6th of 7 signs. They're called signs in John's gospel. So the signs are miracles that unveil the glory and power of God that is working through Jesus. Of course, the 7th one is the resurrection. So this is the last one that's found before the resurrection scene in John chapter 20 and 21. So anyway, the first one is the wedding feast at Cana in chapter 2. The second one mentioned actually is the resurrection, also in chapter 2. But it doesn't mention that. He just mentioned that they're going to believe in him when they see the resurrection. And then there's a bunch of other ones. I don't have them all memorized. But this is the 6th of the 7 signs that are found in John's gospel. And what's, kind of interesting, I suppose, is that many of them remind us of Moses. The signs that Jesus performs, they remind us of Moses or scenes that took place in the life of Moses. For example, another one of the signs is the multiplication of the loaves and fish in John chapter 6. And so what happens? Jesus performs a miracle with bread in the wilderness. And where else do we see a miracle with bread in the wilderness but with Moses in the Exodus? That the Lord performs this miracle through Moses. There's bread on the ground every morning. And so when they see Jesus performing this miracle with bread in the wilderness in John 6, it actually says in that chapter that right after the miracle's done, they wanted to make him king. And so Jesus withdraws to the mountain because he knows this isn't the only miracle with bread that I'm going to perform actually, and it's not my time to become king yet. And then from there it later goes on to the bread of life discourse where he talks about a greater miracle with his body, which is the bread of life. Really, really great. Okay, so anyways, that's what's going on. That's kind of the backdrop to this scene of things happening. Okay, now a man was ill, Lazarus from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. So interesting little thing. These two people, Martha and Mary, are also found in the Gospel of Luke chapter 10. And in the Gospel of Luke chapter 10, of course, we see Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus, and Martha is burdened with much serving. So she's busy serving. So the Bible study, or the study Bible that I look at, says it's probably the same people, but we're not sure. Although if you look at their activity, it sure seems like there's a connection with a similar type of activity. What happens? Jesus comes into the village, and it's Martha who goes while Mary stays behind. So Martha is this active type of person, whereas Mary is this contemplative type of person. One person might call her lazy, perhaps, but that's not really the point. Certainly in Luke's Gospel, chapter 10, the point there is that Mary was just happy to sit at the feet of Jesus. So from a natural perspective, a person might say oh, Mary's just so lazy, but it seems like within this scriptural context that it's more of a contemplative, I'm just going to pray and I'm just going to exist right where I'm at, and that's not necessarily laziness. Anyway, that was a side point, I guess. So anyway, so then the study Bible says, well, based on the temperaments of them being similar to what we see in Luke's gospel, it's likely that they're the same people. Anyway, interesting thing. Okay, so what? Then it says this: Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfumed oil and dried his feet with her hair. This is really interesting because up to this point in John's gospel, John has not mentioned that scene. In fact, it's in John chapter 12 that then the first story is Mary of Bethany anointing Jesus's feet with the oil. So it's interesting that John is including this of oh yeah, it's this Mary, the one who did this, and he hasn't even said what happened when this took place. Kind of an interesting thing, I suppose, that maybe he's trying to okay, I'm going to talk about this story, and then I'm going to talk about this story, and just remember it's the same Mary that is found in both, Anyway, interesting. Okay, so what happens? She sends word to Jesus, Master, the one you love is ill. Jesus says this illness is not to end in death. It's interesting because it does end in death. Of course, we know that it doesn't finally end in death, that it ends in resurrection. But nonetheless, it's just kind of an interesting, again, reading it from just a merely natural perspective. It's well, wait a minute. It does end in death. This is strange. But then stranger still, it says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister Lazarus. So when he heard that he was ill, he remained for 2 days in the place where he was. Again, a strange thing. In the current world that we live in, if we hear that someone is deathly ill, we drop everything. We cancel our plans. We go and talk to our bosses if we have bosses, and we say, hey, I've got my mom or my best friend or someone is going to die. I gotta go. Can I please? And they let us, like we have this kind of understanding in our world. Maybe in like super extreme circumstances, they say, I'm sorry, we can't let you do that. But generally speaking, this is what happens is like we just have this understanding of like when people are approaching death, that kind of stops everything. It stops all of life. And so we got to drop everything and go to the person that is dying so that we can say goodbye. Jesus, on the other hand, is like, I'm going to hang out for a couple of days, and we'll just do that. Interesting. So then what happens? So then they had this back and forth, and Jesus is like, okay, let's finally, after 2 days, let's go back to Judea. And they're like, no. And then he's, kind of gives this parable of walking in the light, and those who walk in the light, they're fine, they're safe. And so in some ways, he's just like, look, I'm not worried about them trying to stone me. I'm living in the light with all of this. I'm just going to see my friend Lazarus, who's dying, and he's dead. So then he says Lazarus is asleep. They think that he's just talking about like taking a nap or something. And so like, wait, what are you talking about? And Jesus is like, no, okay, Lazarus has died. And what does he say? And I am glad for you that I was not there, that you may believe. So he's just like foreshadowing like something incredible is about to happen, which then perhaps is what leads Thomas to say, let's go. Like he's going to be stoned. Let's go and die with him. Interesting thing that Thomas has such courage in this particular scene that we could call him Thomas, like instead of doubting Thomas, we could call him courageous Thomas, that he's willing to go into this place where Jesus' life is being threatened, and he's willing to go just like wherever Jesus goes, that's where I want to go. Okay, so this is where things I think get a little, I don't know, it's just, I noticed something about what biblical commentators, some of them tend to say. So it says, when Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Okay, so excuse me, we know Lazarus was in the tomb for 4 days when Jesus arrived. We also know that when Jesus heard that Lazarus was deathly sick, that he waited for 2 days. So I've seen some biblical commentators say that, well, if Jesus had come right away, then Lazarus wouldn't have died. But that math doesn't work out. Even if Jesus, so he waited for 2 days, so you take 4 days minus 2, you're still left with 2 days. So even if he had come right away, it seems to be the case that Lazarus would still have been dead for 2 days at the time that he got there. Now, an interesting thing takes place that in the Mishnah, which is an ancient Jewish kind of commentary on the Jewish scriptures or about Jewish teachings, in the Mishnah, it talks about how the Jewish people believe that the soul departs from the body after 3 days. So the really interesting point is not that had Jesus come right away, Lazarus would have been alive and he could have prevented his death. The really interesting point is that had Jesus come right away, it still would have been within that 3-day window. In other words, we know, of course, that he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. And had Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead after being dead for just 2 days, plenty of people could easily claim of like, whoa, maybe he wasn't actually dead. Because, it hadn't been 3 days, and so the soul hadn't actually departed, and so maybe there was just like some sort of medical thing or natural explanation for what took place. So Jesus is waiting for 2 days was not so that Lazarus could die, but his waiting for 2 days was so that Lazarus could have been dead for 4 days by the time that he got there, so that when he raised him from the dead, it was truly understood to be a miracle. Truly understood to be like, well, hold on a minute. After 4 days, the body starts to decay in earnest. There's this stench that Martha is talking about of like, no. We can't open the tomb. There's going to be this terrible, like he's going to be decaying. So that's the purpose of Jesus waiting for 2 days, is so that when he performs the miracle of raising Lazarus from the dead, then suddenly everyone can believe in him and trust like, oh, this really is a man sent from God who can do divine things, because no one brings the dead back to life. No one does that. Only God can really do that. Okay, we skipped way ahead. But anyway, let's get back to this dialogue with Jesus and Martha and Mary. So first, just notice this. Now, when Martha comes to Jesus, she says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Then later, when Mary comes to Jesus, what does she say? She says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So anyways, they greet Jesus at different times, but they say the same exact thing to him. As though like they have such confidence in him that regardless of the situation, they're just like, Lord, if you had been here, you would have done something about this. You would have fixed the whole thing. I wonder if we have that confidence in Jesus. We're like, Lord, as long as you're around, I just know that you're going to make everything right. And even if things don't go right, I just know that in the end, you're going to make everything right. Because this ultimately is what Jesus says, your brother will rise. And then Martha still like is still kind of tracking with him. Like, I know he's going to rise in the resurrection at the last day. So like there's like an earthly grief, even while Martha has this perspective that in the end, he's going to come back to life, because in the last day, there's going to be a resurrection. So it's kind of an interesting thing. It's kind of like our approach to death now as Christians is like, we know that those who die in God's grace, they will in fact rise again with Jesus when he comes the second time. And even while they wait for him to come the second time, that their soul departs and enters into glory with him in heaven. And even still, we still experience the sadness of that person not being on earth with us anymore in the same way. And so like we mourn them and grieve them. That's kind of like what Martha and Mary seem to have going on. But then Jesus says, no, like, you don't understand. I am the resurrection. It's not like the resurrection on the last day. It's like, I am. The resurrection has come to you, and I am that. I am the resurrection. I am the life. And whoever believes in me, even if he dies, is going to live. Do you believe this? Do you believe this is going to happen, actually? That's like a big question to ask somebody, especially somebody who's mourning. Like, this is kind of an interesting thing. When someone dies, you're just like there to comfort the family, to be there for them, to just kind of like go along with whatever they have in mind. And here Jesus is asking her a hard question of like, no, do you believe that I'm going to bring everyone back to life? Even if he dies, he's going to come back to life. Do you believe this? It's kind of an intense moment. And she's like, yes, Lord, I have come to believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world. This is also a striking thing, because if you go to Matthew chapter 16, beginning in verse 16, when Jesus is asking the disciples, who do people say that I am? And they're like, John the Baptist, Elijah, one of the prophets. And then he's like, no, but who do you say? And Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of God. Something very similar to that, actually. So anyway, the answer that Martha gives here, her profession of faith, is remarkably similar to the profession of faith that Peter gives, which Jesus says about Peter in response. He says, blessed are you, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my heavenly Father. Jesus says the response of Peter in Matthew 16 has only been given to him by God for him to see clearly, which means that if Martha is answering in a similar way, then he could say the same thing about her. Blessed are you, Martha, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my heavenly Father. That even as Martha is grieving and just kind of wrestling through this really crummy situation, the Father is blessing her and giving her a vision that maybe not everyone gets to have about who Jesus is. That's incredible. Okay, so then Mary finally catches up, and they have this back and forth. Then they go to the tomb, and Jesus, he becomes perturbed and deeply troubled. I think a literal translation, from what I understand, is angry. He becomes angry. And the study Bible I look at says that the anger is not necessarily geared toward anyone, except that he's aware of the response of many of the Jewish leaders around. He's aware that their response is not going to be to marvel at what he's about to do, but it's actually going to be a cause for them to want to put him to death, which is just like a striking thing. But if you read the rest of chapter 11, it says this, that the heading says, the plot to put Jesus to death. That's what they want to do. They want to put him to death as a result of him raising Lazarus. And there's another part where it says they even want to put Lazarus back to death, because then at least no one will believe that he actually raised someone from the dead. It's wild. Okay, so anyway, so then Jesus weeps. He enters into the mourning with the family. He shares in their sorrow, perhaps toward the loss of Lazarus, but maybe, from my perspective anyway, more because he experiences the sadness of those who are still there, of Martha and Mary, and so he's weeping with them, mourning with them as they mourn the loss of their brother. Okay, so then what happens? So Jesus, he comes, he's like, take away the stone. We talked about all of this. And then his prayer, this is great, his prayer, Father, I thank you for hearing me. How many times do we go to pray and we just wonder, like, does God really hear my prayers? And Jesus is so confident in his relationship with the Father. He's like, Father, I thank you for hearing me. I know that you always hear me. But because of the crowd, I've said this, that they may believe that you sent me. And from that place of communion with the Father, from that place of prayer, of confident trust that the Father hears him, he then cries out in a loud voice. It gets a little dramatic, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, tied hand and foot with burial bands. So when they would bury people, they would cover them up with cloths, including a separate cloth for the head. And so he's all tied up in these things. And so you could actually, they did the same thing with Jesus when he died. You could look this up, the Shroud of Turin, if you've never heard of this. Turin, the Shroud of Turin. It's really remarkable, actually. I think it's My understanding is the most studied artifact of history, actually. The most studied artifact of history is the Shroud of Turin. So look that up. That's incredible. Anyway, so these burial bands that happen. So Jesus, everyone sees Lazarus in these burial bands, and he's like, take those off of him. He doesn't need them anymore. Of course, Lazarus eventually dies again, but nonetheless, right now, he's come back to life. Incredible. So what happens? Now, many of the Jews who come to Mary and seen what had been done began to believe in him as a result of this. People began to believe in Jesus because he performed such marvelous things. Beautiful. So good. Okay, that was a long gospel passage. That's okay. It's worth it. We're in that season where things are just longer. Wait until next week with Palm Sunday. That long gospel passage is going to take like 45 minutes. We'll look forward to it. Anyway, before we get there, though, we got one more reading from Paul's letter to the Romans. We will see you soon.